The blistering afternoon sun beat down on the dusty platform of Placerville Station, California, as Beatrice Hayes clutched her worn leather valise with trembling fingers. The year was 1875, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, only to find herself standing alone, abandoned at first sight by the very person who had promised her a new life. "He took one look at you and rode off," the station master's wife asked, her weathered face pinched with sympathy. "Land sakes, child, what a coward!" Beatrice swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. At 22, she had left everything behind: her position as a schoolteacher, her small rented room, the grave of her parents, all based on the promise of marriage to Edwin Caldwell, a man whose letters had painted such a convincing picture of devotion. Now she stood in the sweltering heat, the weight of her foolishness crushing her more than the heavy traveling dress that clung to her perspiring skin. "He said I wasn't what he expected," she managed to say, the memory of Edwin's dismissive glance still stinging. "Too plain, too thin." She tried to keep her voice steady. He said he was sorry for the inconvenience," the station master's wife scoffed. "Inconvenience? Traveling across the country ain't an inconvenience, it's a life-altering decision, and that man treated it like ordering the wrong cut of beef." She shook her head. "Come inside, dear. You look about ready to faint from the heat." As Beatrice followed the kind woman into the small station house, she noticed a tall figure leaning against the hitching post outside. A man in a worn leather vest and dusty work clothes watched her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter despite her distress. His eyes, the clearest blue she'd ever seen, seemed to look right through her. "Don't mind Jacob Norwood," the station master's wife whispered. "He runs the largest cattle operation this side of the Sierras. Keeps to himself mostly, since his brother died 2 years back." Jacob Norwood. The name sounded solid, dependable, nothing like the fleeting promises of Edwin Caldwell, but Beatrice quickly pushed the thought away. She hadn't come all this way to throw herself at the first man who looked her way. She needed a plan, not another ill-conceived attempt at finding a husband. "Is there a hotel in town?" Beatrice asked, trying to focus on practical matters. "I'll need lodging until I can arrange passage back east." The station master's wife looked troubled. "Hotels full up with miners and travelers. Gold fever's hit these parts again." She hesitated. "There's Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, but she's particular about taking in women without proper introductions." Beatrice felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. She had exactly $12.43 to her name, not nearly enough for a return ticket to Boston. "I can work," she said firmly. "I was a school teacher." "Perhaps the town needs. We've had a teacher for 3 years now," the station master said as he entered from the telegraph room. "Fine young man from Sacramento." A shadow fell across the doorway, and Jacob Norwood stepped inside, removing his hat in a gesture that spoke of an upbringing far more refined than his rugged appearance suggested. "Pardon the interruption." His voice was deep but soft, like distant thunder. "I couldn't help overhearing your predicament, Miss Hayes," Beatrice supplied, unconsciously straightening her posture. "Beatrice Hayes." Jacob nodded. "Miss Hayes. My ranch is short a housekeeper. Lost mine to matrimony last month when she ran off with my foreman." A brief smile touched his lips. "It's respectable work if you're interested. Room and board included, plus wages." Beatrice studied him carefully. At perhaps 30, he was older than Edwin, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and long days of hard work. His hands were calloused, his skin tanned, but there was something in his steady gaze that stirred her trust. "I've never been a housekeeper," she admitted, "but I'm willing to learn." "Can you cook without burning down a kitchen?" he asked. A small smile tugged at her lips despite everything. "Yes, Mr. Norwood, I can manage that much." "Can you read?" His question seemed odd given her earlier mention of being a teacher. "Quite well," she replied, a touch of pride entering her voice. "I've taught children for 4 years." Jacob nodded as if confirming something to himself. "My brother left behind 2 children. Their mother passed in childbirth years ago. They need education beyond what I can provide." He twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture that humanized his imposing frame. "It would be a combination of duties, keeping house and teaching the children when chores allow." Beatrice's heart quickened. Teaching was something she understood, something she was good at, and children she'd always found joy in their company. "The children's ages?" she asked. "Emma's 7. Michael's 5. Orphaned at such young ages, like herself. The parallels were not lost on her. "I would want to be clear about my duties and compensation," she said carefully, not wanting to appear desperate despite her circumstances. Jacob nodded approvingly. "A sensible approach. We can discuss details on the ride to the ranch, if you're amenable." The station master's wife touched Beatrice's arm. "Jacob Norwood's word is as good as gold in this town, dear. If he offers you a position, you can trust he'll be fair." Beatrice looked between them, weighing her limited options against this unexpected opportunity. What choice did she really have? Return to Boston in shame, beg for her old position, admit to everyone that she had been found wanting by the man who had promised to cherish her. "When would you like me to start?" she asked Jacob. A flicker of something relief perhaps crossed his face. "Today, if you're not too exhausted from your journey. The children are with my housekeeper's mother in town, but they'll be returning home tonight." And so, with little more than a quick farewell to the station master and his wife, Beatrice found herself seated beside Jacob Norwood in his wagon, her valise and trunk secured in the back, headed toward a future she couldn't have imagined when she stepped off the train mere hours before. The wagon jostled along the uneven road leading out of Placerville, kicking up dust that settled on Beatrice's already travel-worn clothes. She gripped the wooden seat as they navigated a particularly rough patch, trying to maintain her dignity despite being thrown about like a rag doll. "Sorry about the road," Jacob said, his eyes fixed ahead. "Spring rains washed out sections we haven't fully repaired yet." Beatrice nodded, unsure what to say to this man who had, in the span of minutes, become her employer. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "Your brother," she finally ventured. "How did he?" Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "Mining accident, tunnel collapse." "He wasn't even a miner, just went in to help rescue some men after the first cave-in." He exhaled slowly. "That was James, always running toward trouble if it meant helping someone else." "The children must miss him terribly," Beatrice said softly. "They do." Jacob's voice roughened. "Emma remembers him clearly, asks about him still. Michael was just 3 when it happened. His memories are fading." He glanced at her briefly. "I've tried to keep James alive for them through stories, but I'm not good with words like he was." Beatrice felt a pang of empathy. "Children need those connections to the past, to who they are." Jacob nodded, seeming grateful for her understanding. "What brought you out here as a mail-order bride, if you don't mind my asking? A school teacher usually has prospects." The directness of his question caught her off guard. "I had prospects for continued spinsterhood," she said with more bitterness than intended. "In Boston, teaching positions for women disappear upon marriage, but unmarried teachers are expected to live like nuns while earning barely enough to survive." She looked out at the passing landscape. "My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. With no family left, The idea of starting fresh somewhere new with a partner who might value both my mind and my companionship seemed hopeful. Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Edwin Caldwell is a fool," he said finally. Beatrice turned to him in surprise. "You know him?" "Everyone knows everyone in these parts," Jacob replied. "He owns the mercantile on Main Street, inherited it from his father, has ideas about his own importance that exceed the reality." Beatrice couldn't help but laugh, though the sound held little humor. "He wrote such beautiful letters. I should have known they were too perfect." "His mother probably wrote them," Jacob said. "She's been trying to get him married off for years. Probably thought any woman would do, sight unseen." The casual cruelty of it stung anew. "And upon seeing me, he discovered I wouldn't do it all." Jacob slowed the wagon as they turned onto a narrower trail. "Miss Hayes," he said carefully, "Edwin Caldwell judges books by their covers and misses the stories inside. It's his loss." Something in his tone made Beatrice glance at him, but his eyes were focused on the trail ahead, his expression unreadable. "The ranch is just beyond that rise," he said, changing the subject. "It's not what you might be used to in Boston, but it's solid. My father built the main house, added on to it as the family grew." As they crested the hill, Beatrice caught her breath. Below them sprawled a valley cradled by distant mountains, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over everything. A large, whitewashed farmhouse stood proudly among a cluster of outbuildings and corrals. Beyond, cattle dotted the green pastures and a stream wound its way through the property like a silver ribbon. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Jacob's expression softened with pride. "Norwood Ranch. Been in the family for 30 years. Started with my father's dream and 20 head of cattle. Now we run over 2,000 head." He guided the horses down the slope. "The house needs a woman's touch. Has since my mother passed 10 years ago. James's wife, Sarah, tried, but she was only with us for 3 years before the fever took her." As they approached the house, Beatrice noticed the practical sturdiness of it, the wide porch, the curtainless windows, the weather-beaten door that spoke of functionality over beauty. A home built for durability rather than appearance. Like its owner, she thought. Jacob helped her down from the wagon, his large hands strong but gentle at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she immediately attributed to simple human contact after her long, lonely journey. "I'll show you to your room," he said, retrieving her luggage. "You can rest a bit before the children return. Mrs. Larson will bring them by after supper." The inside of the house was clean but sparse, lacking the feminine touches that would make it truly a home. The furniture was solid and well made, but positioned with little thought to comfort or conversation. Books were stacked haphazardly on shelves, and a layer of dust covered surfaces that were harder to reach. Her room, however, surprised her. Located off the kitchen, it was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a faded but clean quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small dresser. The window overlooked a kitchen garden gone somewhat wild with neglect. "It was Sarah's sewing room," Jacob explained, setting down her trunk. "Converted it after. Well, seemed a proper place for a housekeeper." "It's lovely," Beatrice said, genuinely pleased with the private space. Jacob nodded awkwardly. "Well, I'll leave you to settle in." "Kitchen stocked, though not with much variety. We usually have simple fare." After he left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. This morning, she had been filled with nervous anticipation about meeting her future husband. Now, she was a housekeeper and teacher on a cattle ranch, employed by a man who seemed as complicated as he was reserved. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the weight of her disappointment and fear. Then, with the practical determination that had carried her through orphanhood and independence in Boston. She unpacked her few belongings and set about exploring her new domain. The kitchen told the story of a household run by a man focused on necessity rather than comfort. The pantry held basics: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, but lacked the spices and extras that would elevate meals beyond mere sustenance. The cast iron stove was well maintained, but showed signs of cooking disasters hastily cleaned up. Beatrice rolled up her sleeves and began organizing, taking inventory, forming a mental list of what she would need to request from town. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear Jacob return until he cleared his throat from the doorway. "You don't need to start work today," he said, looking somewhat disconcerted by her immediate industriousness. Beatrice straightened, brushing flour from her hands. "I prefer to keep busy," she replied, "especially after." She didn't finish the sentence, but understanding crossed his face. "Well, in that case, there's stew left from yesterday. Should be enough for us tonight," he hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer something else." "Stew is perfect," she assured him. "I'll have it ready shortly." Jacob looked as if he wanted to say more, but simply nodded and retreated to what she assumed was his study. Alone again, Beatrice reheated the stew, adding some herbs she found growing wild outside the kitchen door to enhance the flavor. She set the table for two, using the mismatched dishes she found in the cupboard, and called Jacob when everything was ready. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Jacob spoke. "You've improved the stew somehow." Beatrice smiled. "Just some fresh thyme and rosemary from outside." "Didn't know we had those," he admitted. "The garden needs attention, but there are good bones there." She took a sip of water. "With your permission, I'd like to resurrect it properly. Fresh vegetables would diversify your meals considerably." Jacob studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You're not what I expected in a housekeeper," he said finally. "Is that a problem?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "No," he said slowly. "It's refreshing." He seemed about to add something when hoofbeats sounded outside, followed by children's voices. Jacob stood quickly. "That'll be Emma and Michael." For the first time, she saw nervousness cross his face. "They can be a handful, Emma especially, strong-willed like her father." The door burst open before Beatrice could respond, and a whirlwind in the form of a small girl with tangled blonde braids rushed in. "Uncle Jake, Mrs. Larson let me ride her mare all by myself while Michael rode with her, and I didn't fall off even once," and the child stopped abruptly when she noticed Beatrice. "Who are you?" "Emma," Jacob admonished gently. "Manners." A smaller boy peeked around the doorframe, his eyes wide and curious. Unlike his sister's bold approach, he seemed content to observe from a distance. "Children," Jacob said formally, "this is Miss Hayes. She's going to be our new housekeeper and your teacher." Emma's face scrunched in suspicion. "Teacher? We don't go to school till fall." "You'll be learning here at home," Jacob explained. Miss Hayes was a schoolteacher in Boston. Michael finally entered fully, moving to stand beside his sister. "What's Boston?" he asked in a small voice. Beatrice knelt to be at eye level with the children. "Boston is a big city far to the east near the ocean," she explained. "I lived there my whole life until now." "Why'd you leave?" Emma demanded, still eyeing her warily. Beatrice considered her answer carefully. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. I came west hoping for a new beginning, and now I've found myself here with you." Emma seemed to consider this. "Can you make apple pie? Our mama could make the best apple pie, but she went to heaven." The directness of children never failed to catch Beatrice off guard. "I can make apple pie," she confirmed, "though I can't promise it will be as good as your mother's." "Nothing is," Emma declared with certainty, An older woman appeared in the doorway, her gray hair escaping from a practical bun. "These two have been fed and should be ready for bed soon," she announced, looking curiously at Beatrice. Jacob made hasty introductions. "Mrs. Larson, this is Miss Hayes, our new housekeeper. Miss Hayes, Mrs. Larson has been helping with the children since her daughter left us." Mrs. Larson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, that was quick work, Jacob Norwood. Wasn't expecting you to find someone so soon." She gave Beatrice an appraising look. "You know anything about raising children, Miss Hayes?" "I taught children for 4 years," Beatrice replied, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. "And I was often responsible for their well-being beyond academic concerns." Mrs. Larson harumphed, but there was a hint of approval in her expression. "These two need a firm hand, especially this one." She ruffled Emma's hair affectionately. "Got her daddy's spirit and her mama's stubbornness." "I'm not stubborn," Emma protested, looking stubborn. "Of course not, darling," Mrs. Larson said with a wink to Beatrice. "Well, I'll leave you to get acquainted. Jacob knows where to find me if you need anything." She gave Jacob a meaningful look. "And I mean anything, Jacob. Don't be too proud to ask." After Mrs. Larson departed, a slightly awkward silence fell over the room. Michael edged closer to Beatrice, studying her with solemn eyes. "Do you know stories?" he asked suddenly. "Uncle Jake knows some, but he always forgets the good parts." Jacob looked mildly offended. "I tell perfectly good stories." Beatrice couldn't help but smile at the interaction. "I know many stories. Perhaps I could tell you one before bed." Michael nodded enthusiastically while Emma maintained her skeptical stance. "First," Jacob interjected, "you both need baths. You smell like horses and dirt." This announcement was met with predictable protest, particularly from Emma, but Jacob remained firm. As he herded the reluctant children toward the washroom, he glanced back at Beatrice. "Welcome to Norwood Ranch, Miss Hayes," he said with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I hope you don't regret your decision by morning." Watching him guide the children with gruff affection, Beatrice felt something shift inside her, a small, cautious hope that perhaps this unexpected detour in her life might lead somewhere worth exploring. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Beatrice established routines and boundaries at Norwood Ranch. Each day brought new challenges and small victories as she settled into her role. The house gradually transformed under her care. Curtains appeared at windows, wildflowers brightened the table, and meals became more varied and flavorful. The neglected garden saw new life as she cleared weeds and planted seeds saved from kitchen vegetables. The children, too, responded to her presence. Michael attached himself to her almost immediately, following her about the house and asking endless questions. Emma remained cautious, testing Beatrice's limits with small rebellions, forgetting chores, arguing about lessons, deliberately using poor grammar despite knowing better. Beatrice recognized the behavior for what it was: fear of another loss, another change, and responded with patient consistency. Jacob watched these developments with quiet attention. He was often absent during daylight hours, tending to ranch business, but evenings found the 4 of them gathered around the dinner table, sharing the day's events. Beatrice noticed how he relaxed incrementally as days passed, his shoulders losing some of their rigid tension, occasional laughter coming more easily. One evening, after the children were asleep, Beatrice was mending a tear in one of Michael's shirts on the porch when Jacob joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "You've made quite a difference around here," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Haven't had the house this orderly since my mother was alive." Beatrice accepted the coffee gratefully. The evenings were still cool, especially after sunset. "The children are wonderful," she said. "Emma's beginning to trust me, I think. She let me braid her hair this morning without complaint." Jacob chuckled. "That's progress indeed. Last time Mrs. Larson tried, Emma hid in the hayloft for 3 hours." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been meaning to ask," Jacob said finally. "Are you content here, Miss Hayes? With your duties, your accommodations?" The question surprised her. "I am," she answered honestly. "It's not the life I imagined when I left Boston, but—" She paused, considering. There's satisfaction in seeing immediate results of one's work. A clean house, a good meal, a child understanding something new. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "Different from teaching in a schoolroom, I imagine. Very different. There I rarely saw children beyond school hours, never knew if the lessons truly took root." She smiled. "Here, I can see Michael practicing his letters while feeding chickens, or Emma calculating eggs and milk for recipes." "You've given them structure they've lacked," Jacob said. "I've done my best, but—" He gestured vaguely. "A ranch doesn't run itself." "You've given them security and love," Beatrice countered. "That's far more important than perfectly scheduled days." Jacob's eyes met hers, something warm in their depths. "You're very generous, Miss Hayes." "Beatrice," she said impulsively. "Please call me Beatrice." "Miss Hayes makes me feel like I'm still standing at the front of a classroom." A smile tugged at his lips. "Beatrice," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Jacob. Mr. Norwood makes me feel like my father." Their laughter mingled in the night air, and Beatrice felt something shift between them, a barrier lowered, a bridge extended. "Jacob," she tried the name cautiously. "I wonder if I might make a request." "Name it," he said immediately. "The children need books, readers, arithmetic texts, and perhaps a slate and chalk. I've been using paper from your study, but it won't last." Jacob looked chagrined. "I should have thought of that. Make a list of what you need. I'll ride into town on Saturday." He hesitated. "Would you like to come along? You haven't left the ranch since you arrived." The invitation was unexpected but welcome. "I'd like that very much," she said. "The children too, of course." He finished his coffee. "It's settled then. We'll make a day of it." When Saturday arrived, Beatrice woke early, filled with anticipation that surprised her in its intensity. She dressed in her best remaining dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. Emma watched the process with fascination from the doorway. "You look pretty," the little girl announced, "like a picture in a book." Beatrice smiled at the reflection of the child in her small mirror. "Thank you, Emma. That's a lovely compliment." Emma entered the room fully, touching the fabric of Beatrice's dress with curious fingers. "Are you trying to look nice for Uncle Jake?" The innocent question caught Beatrice off guard. "I'm trying to look presentable for town," she corrected gently. "It's important to make a good impression." Emma looked unconvinced. "Uncle Jake watches you when you're not looking," she said matter-of-factly. "Like how he used to watch for deer when we went hunting before you came." Heat rose to Beatrice's cheeks. "Emma, that's not—" "He's happier now," the child continued, oblivious to Beatrice's discomfort. "He doesn't look sad when he thinks no one's watching anymore." Before Beatrice could formulate a response to this startling observation, Michael's excited voice called from outside, announcing that the wagon was ready. The trip to town was filled with the children's chatter and questions. Jacob pointed out landmarks along the way: the ridge where his father had first decided to settle, the stream where he and James had fished as boys, the oak tree where he'd carved their initials decades ago. As they approached Placerville, Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness. What if they encountered Edwin Caldwell? The thought of facing the man who had so casually rejected her still stung, despite the unexpected turn her life had taken. Jacob seemed to sense her tension. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly while the children were distracted by the sight of other wagons on the road. "Just a bit anxious about returning to town," she admitted. "My last visit wasn't exactly pleasant." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "If we see Caldwell, you don't have to speak to him," he assured her. "Or if you'd prefer, I could have words with him about his behavior." The protective offer warmed her. "That won't be necessary," she said. "But thank you." Placerville on a Saturday was bustling with activity. Miners and ranchers, townspeople and travelers filled the streets. Jacob guided the wagon to a hitching post outside the general store. "We'll get your school supplies first," he told Beatrice. "Then the groceries." Inside the mercantile, Beatrice felt a surge of dread when she spotted a balding man behind the counter, but it wasn't Edwin. Jacob introduced her to the shopkeeper, Mr. Peterson, explaining their needs. As they collected slates, readers, and other supplies, Beatrice became aware of curious glances from other customers. "News travels fast in small towns," Jacob murmured, noticing her discomfort. "They're just curious about the new face at Norwood Ranch." "What exactly have they heard?" she asked, suddenly concerned about her reputation. Jacob's expression turned wry. "Depends on who's telling the tale. Mrs. Larson has likely given a factual account. Others may have embellished." "Embellished how?" Beatrice pressed. Before Jacob could answer, a woman's voice called his name. They turned to see an elegantly dressed woman approaching, her expensive attire looking somewhat out of place in the practical mercantile. "Jacob Norwood, you've been scarce in town lately," the woman said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as they assessed Beatrice. "Mrs. Caldwell," Jacob nodded politely. "Been busy with spring calving." Beatrice froze at the name. This was Edwin's mother, the woman who had possibly written the letters that had brought her across the country. Mrs. Caldwell's gaze settled on Beatrice with sudden interest. "And who might this be?" Jacob placed a hand lightly at the small of Beatrice's back, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "This is Miss Beatrice Hayes, our new housekeeper and the children's teacher." "Beatrice, Mrs. Vivian Caldwell." Recognition flashed in Mrs. Caldwell's eyes. "Miss Hayes," she said, her voice tightening. "How unexpected to see you still in Placerville." Beatrice straightened her spine, determined to maintain her dignity. "Life often takes unexpected turns, Mrs. Caldwell. I've been fortunate to find a position that suits my skills." Mrs. Caldwell's lips pursed slightly. "Yes, well. My son explained there was a misunderstanding about his requirements for a bride. These arrangements can be so imprecise." "No misunderstanding," Jacob interjected, his voice deceptively casual. "Just poor judgment on Edwin's part." Mrs. Caldwell's expression cooled further. "I see you've formed opinions without knowing the circumstances, Jacob. I know that your son made promises he had no intention of keeping once he laid eyes on Miss Hayes," Jacob replied evenly. "That tells me all I need to know about his character." The tension in the air was palpable. Beatrice touched Jacob's arm lightly. "We should find the children. They've been very patient." Jacob nodded, his eyes still locked with Mrs. Caldwell's. "Good day, Vivian." As they moved away, Mrs. Caldwell called after them. "You know, Jacob, some might question your own judgment, bringing an unknown woman into your home with those impressionable children." Jacob turned back slowly. "Some might," he agreed, his voice dangerously soft. "But those who know me understand I don't make decisions lightly about my ranch or my family." The emphasis on the word family was subtle but clear. Beatrice felt herself included in that designation, and the realization sent a warm current through her veins. They found Emma and Michael examining a display of hard candies, their eyes wide with desire. Jacob purchased a small paper bag of sweets for them before ushering everyone outside, eager to leave the charged atmosphere of the store. "I'm sorry about that," he said to Beatrice once they were on the boardwalk. "Vivian Caldwell has always believed her opinion should matter to everyone in town." "It's all right," Beatrice assured him, though her heart was still racing from the encounter. "I knew I might face some awkwardness returning to town." Jacob studied her face. "You handled yourself with grace. Not everyone would after what happened." His approval shouldn't have mattered so much, but Beatrice found herself absurdly pleased by it. "Thank you for defending me," she said softly. "Wasn't defending so much as stating facts," he replied with a shrug, though his eyes held something warmer than casual dismissal. They continued their errands, stopping at the butcher's and the baker's. Everywhere they went, Beatrice was aware of curious glances and whispered comments, but with Jacob and the children beside her, she found she didn't mind as much as she'd feared. At the baker's shop, they encountered a cheerful woman who introduced herself as Sarah Miller, the doctor's wife. "We've heard so much about you, Miss Hayes," she said warmly. "All good things from Mrs. Larson, I assure you. We've been hoping to meet the woman who's brought such positive changes to Norwood Ranch." Beatrice was startled by this friendly reception. "I've only been doing my job," she demurred. Mrs. Miller laughed. "Well, your job has put color back in this man's cheeks and smiles on those children's faces. That's worth noting in our little community." Jacob looked uncomfortable with this assessment but didn't contradict it. Instead, he purchased fresh bread and cinnamon rolls for Sunday breakfast, silencing the children's excited exclamations with a stern look that held no real disapproval. As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A well-dressed man was emerging, supported by two companions. Even from a distance, Beatrice recognized Edwin Caldwell, apparently deep in his cups despite the early hour. Jacob noticed her tension immediately. "We can take the back route," he offered quietly. Beatrice shook her head. "No. I won't hide." Edwin spotted them as they approached, his eyes widening in recognition. He shook off his companions and stepped into the street, blocking their path. "Well, if it isn't the school marm," he slurred, his handsome face twisted in an unpleasant smile. "Found yourself a place with Norwood, I see. Didn't take long to secure a position on your back." Jacob was off the wagon in an instant, his movement so swift Beatrice barely registered it before he stood toe-to-toe with Edwin. "Apologize," Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Edwin sneered. "For what? Speaking the truth. Everyone knows why a man takes in a woman like that." The punch happened so quickly that Beatrice couldn't have prevented it even if she'd tried. Jacob's fist connected with Edwin's jaw with a sickening crack, sending the smaller man sprawling in the dirt. The children gasped in unison. "Jacob!" Beatrice cried, alarmed by the violence despite her outrage at Edwin's insinuation. Jacob stood over Edwin, who was groaning and holding his jaw. "Miss Hayes is employed as my housekeeper and my niece and nephew's teacher," he said clearly, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "She is under my protection and deserving of every respect. Anyone suggesting otherwise answers to me." He looked around at the townspeople. "Is that understood?" Murmurs of assent rippled through the onlookers. Jacob returned to the wagon, his face still tight with anger. "I apologize for the display," he said stiffly to Beatrice as he took up the reins. "But I won't apologize for defending your honor." "That was amazing," Emma breathed, looking at her uncle with newfound admiration. "You knocked him right over." "Violence isn't the answer to disagreements," Beatrice said automatically, though her heart wasn't entirely in the reprimand. A part of her she wasn't entirely proud of had been gratified by Jacob's swift defense. "Sometimes it is," Jacob replied simply, guiding the wagon away from the scene. They rode in silence for several minutes, the children unusually quiet, sensing the tension between the adults. Finally, Michael spoke up. "Miss Beatrice, are you mad at Uncle Jake?" Beatrice sighed, looking at Jacob's profile. "No, Michael, I'm not mad, just processing what happened." Jacob glanced at her. "I lost my temper. It's not something I'm proud of. But I won't stand by while someone slanders you, especially when the children can hear." His protectiveness touched her deeply, even as she struggled with the implications of his public defense. "People will talk more now," she pointed out. "Let them," he said firmly. "Those whose opinions matter know the truth." As they continued toward home, Beatrice realized something significant had shifted between them. Jacob had declared her under his protection in front of the entire town. Whatever their arrangement had been before, it had just become something more complicated and potentially more meaningful. That night, after the children were asleep, Beatrice found Jacob on the porch again, staring out at the star-filled sky. She brought him a cup of coffee and joined him without invitation. "Your hand," she said, noticing the bruising across his knuckles. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Let me see," she insisted, setting down her own cup and reaching for his hand. After a moment's hesitation, he placed his hand in hers. The simple contact sent a current through her that had nothing to do with nursing his injury. She examined the bruising carefully, aware of his eyes on her face. "You should soak it in cold water," she advised, her voice not entirely steady. "I've had worse," he said softly. Neither of them moved to break the contact. His hand remained in hers, warm and solid. "What you did today," she began. "It was unnecessary but appreciated." Jacob's fingers curled slightly around hers. "Caldwell had no right to speak to you that way. No right to reject you in the first place." Beatrice looked up, meeting his gaze in the lamplight. Perhaps it was for the best that he did. The words hung between them, filled with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Jacob's eyes darkened with an emotion Beatrice was afraid to name. "Perhaps it was," he agreed finally. They sat in companionable silence after that, their hands eventually separating but something unspoken binding them closer than before. When Beatrice finally rose to retire for the night, Jacob caught her hand once more. "Beatrice," he said her name like a question. "Yes," he seemed to struggle with his words. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "Not just for the children, for everything." It wasn't a declaration of love, but in that moment it felt like something equally profound. "I'm glad I'm here too," she replied softly. As spring gave way to summer, life at Norwood Ranch settled into comfortable rhythms. The children thrived under Beatrice's guidance, their education balanced with practical skills and plenty of play. The house transformed, further curtains were sewn from fabric purchased in town. The garden flourished with vegetables and flowers, and meals became occasions for conversation and laughter rather than merely sustenance. Jacob, too, changed subtly. He began taking more meals with them rather than eating hastily before returning to work. He joined Beatrice and the children for reading sessions in the evenings, his deep voice giving life to adventure stories that captivated Michael. He even allowed Emma to convince him to help with her arithmetic when she struggled, showing unexpected patience with her frustration. Beatrice found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, the gentleness in his hands when he lifted Michael onto his horse for riding lessons, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when Emma mastered a difficult concept, the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch and its workers. Somewhere along the way, her appreciation for his kindness had deepened into something more complicated, something that quickened her heart when their hands accidentally touched, or when she caught him looking at her across the room. The incident in town had, as she'd predicted, sparked new gossip, but it had also clarified their standing in the community. The doctor's wife became a regular visitor, bringing news and friendship. Other ranchers' wives called, ostensibly to welcome her but clearly to assess the woman who had seemingly captured the attention of the previously confirmed bachelor Jacob Norwood. Beatrice maintained careful boundaries, reminding herself and others that she was an employee, nothing more. Yet in unguarded moments, she found herself wondering if there could be more if the warmth in Jacob's eyes when he thought she wasn't looking might someday translate into words. The turning point came in late July. A sudden summer storm had blown in while Jacob and two ranch hands were moving cattle in the high pasture. Lightning struck a tree near the house, sending it crashing onto the roof of the barn. Beatrice had rushed the children to the storm cellar, assuring them that everything would be fine while her own heart raced with fear not for herself, but for Jacob, exposed on the open range. Hours passed with no sign of him. The storm finally abated as evening approached, and Beatrice emerged with the children to assess the damage. The barn roof was partially collapsed, but thankfully the animals had escaped serious injury. As darkness fell with still no sign of Jacob, true fear began to set in. "Where's Uncle Jake?" Michael asked for the dozenth time, his small face pinched with worry. "He'll be here soon," Beatrice assured him, though her own confidence was waning. "He probably had to take shelter until the storm passed." Emma, more perceptive, studied Beatrice's face. "You're scared," she accused. "You think something bad happened to him?" Beatrice knelt to the child's level. "I'm concerned," she admitted, "but your uncle is very capable. He knows these lands better than anyone." "Papa knew the mines too," Emma said softly. "He still didn't come home." The comparison struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She gathered both children close. "Let's light the lanterns," she suggested, "so he can find his way home in the dark." They placed lanterns in every window, their combined glow turning the house into a beacon. Beatrice prepared a simple meal, though none of them had much appetite. She read to the children until they finally dozed off on the sofa, refusing to go to bed until their uncle returned. Alone with her thoughts, Beatrice paced the porch, straining to hear any sound of approach. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the ranch when she finally spotted movement on the road. A lone rider slumped in the saddle. "Jacob," she called, gathering her skirts and running toward him. He looked up at her voice, straightening slightly. As he drew closer, she could see he was soaked through and exhausted, a gash visible on his forehead. "Beatrice," he said hoarsely as she reached for his horse's bridle. "The children, safe inside," she assured him. "Asleep on the sofa waiting for you." Relief washed over his face. "Thank God." He attempted to dismount but stumbled, nearly falling. Beatrice was at his side instantly, supporting him with surprising strength. "You're injured." "Lost my horse in the flash flood," he explained as she helped him toward the house. "Had to walk until I found one of the hands. He loaned me his mount." He winced as he put weight on his left leg. "Twisted my ankle when I fell. Nothing serious." The children woke at their entrance, rushing to Jacob with cries of relief and concern. He mustered a smile for them, assuring them he was fine, just tired and wet. Beatrice sent them to fetch dry clothes and heat water while she helped Jacob to his chair by the fire. "You need to get out of these wet things," she said practically, though her hands trembled slightly as she helped him remove his sodden jacket. "Trying to undress me, Miss Hayes." He attempted to joke, but the humor fell flat as he winced in pain. "Trying to prevent pneumonia, Mr. Norwood," she retorted, reverting to formality to hide her emotional state. Once the children had brought dry clothes, Beatrice shooed them to the kitchen to prepare hot coffee and soup while she helped Jacob change. The intimacy of the situation wasn't lost on either of them, but necessity overrode propriety. "Your head needs tending," she said, examining the gash. "And that ankle should be wrapped." Jacob submitted to her ministrations without protest, watching her face as she cleaned and bandaged his wound, her fingers gentle against his skin. "You were worried," he observed quietly, Beatrice's hand stilled. "Of course I was worried." The children were terrified. She resumed her work, avoiding his eyes. "Emma," she mentioned her father, how he didn't come home. Jacob closed his eyes briefly. "I should have found a way to send word." "How, in the middle of a storm?" She secured the bandage and began examining his ankle, which was swollen but not severely. "You're here now, that's what matters." As she wrapped his ankle, Jacob caught her hand, forcing her to look at him. "Beatrice," he said softly, "why were you crying?" She hadn't realized tears had escaped until he mentioned them. Embarrassed, she tried to pull away, but he held firm. "I thought," her voice broke, "I feared you might be hurt or worse. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The admission cost her. She had revealed far more than was proper for a housekeeper concerned about her employer. But in that moment, with the fear of loss still fresh, she couldn't maintain the pretense that her feelings were merely professional. Jacob's expression softened. "Come here," he said gently, tugging her closer until she knelt beside his chair. With his free hand, he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I'm not easy to get rid of." "Don't joke," she whispered. "Not about this." His smile faded. "You're right, I'm sorry." He studied her face intently. "Beatrice, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it? Are you happy here? Not just content, but truly happy." The question wasn't what she'd expected. She considered it carefully before answering. "Yes," she said finally. "I am. The children, the ranch, the work. It feels like home in a way Boston never did." Something in his expression shifted, a tension releasing. "And me? How do you feel about me?" This was dangerous territory. Once certain words were spoken, they couldn't be taken back. But the fear of losing him had stripped away her caution. "I care for you," she admitted. "More than I should, given my position." Jacob's hand moved to cup her face. "Your position," he echoed. "That's the heart of it, isn't it? You came here as my employee, but that's not how I see you anymore." Not for some time. Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile but insistent. "How do you see me?" "As the woman who brought life back into this house," he said softly. "The woman my brother's children adore, the woman I find myself thinking about from sunrise to sunset." He leaned closer. "The woman I want to build a future with if she'll have me." Beatrice's breath caught. "Jacob, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Beatrice Hayes," he interrupted, the words rushing out as if he'd held them back too long. "Not as my housekeeper or the children's teacher, but as the woman you are. Strong, kind, intelligent, beautiful." "Beautiful," she echoed in disbelief. "Edwin Caldwell would disagree." Jacob's expression hardened briefly. "Edwin Caldwell is a fool who couldn't recognize a treasure when it was delivered to his doorstep. His blindness was my good fortune." His features softened again. "You are beautiful to me, Beatrice. In every way that matters." The sincerity in his voice undid her last defenses. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've tried not to, knowing my place, but your place," he cut in, "is wherever you choose it to be. I'm hoping you'll choose to be by my side, not as my employee, but as my wife." The proposal, blunt and heartfelt, left her momentarily speechless. "Your wife." She finally managed. Jacob nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "Unless I've misread everything and made a complete fool of myself." Beatrice laughed, joy bubbling up despite her tears. "You haven't misread anything." She placed her hand over his where it still rested against her cheek. "I would be honored to be your wife, Jacob Norwood." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and transformative. He pulled her closer, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "May I kiss you now, future Mrs. Norwood?" In answer, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, as the kiss deepened with months of unspoken longing. They broke apart at the sound of a small gasp from the doorway. Emma and Michael stood there, wide-eyed, a tray of soup and coffee forgotten in Emma's hands. "Are you going to be our new aunt?" Emma demanded, practical as always. Jacob laughed, keeping one arm around Beatrice's waist. "If she'll have us, Pumpkin, she'll be much more than that. She'll be your mother in every way that matters." Michael's face lit up. "Really? Forever and ever?" Beatrice opened her arms to the children, who rushed to join them in an awkward but perfect embrace. "Forever and ever," she promised, looking over their heads at Jacob, whose eyes shone with love and promise. As summer turned to autumn, Placerville buzzed with news of the upcoming wedding of Jacob Norwood and Beatrice Hayes. Some expressed surprise at the match, others claimed they'd seen it coming from the start. But all agreed it was a fitting union, the reserved rancher and the determined Eastern schoolteacher, who had found each other through an unlikely twist of fate. Beatrice insisted on a simple ceremony, conscious of her position as a former mail-order bride who had been rejected by another. But Jacob would have none of her self-consciousness. "You're not defined by what happened with Caldwell," he told her firmly as they discussed arrangements. "You're the woman I love, the woman who's transformed our lives. I want everyone to witness our happiness." In the end, they compromised on a ceremony at the ranch, with the newly repaired barn decorated for the occasion. Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Larson took charge of the preparations, enlisting other women from town to help transform the utilitarian space into something worthy of a wedding. Emma, appointed flower girl with great ceremony, took her duties extremely seriously, practicing her walk for days. Michael insisted on carrying the rings, his small face solemn with responsibility. Jacob's ranch hands, usually rough and taciturn men, revealed unexpected talents, one fashioning an arch from twisted branches, another playing violin for the dancing afterward. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, the first hints of autumn coloring the distant hills. Beatrice stood at her bedroom window, watching the early light touch the land that had become her home. So much had changed in just 5 months, from the humiliation of rejection at the train station to finding a family and love she hadn't dared to dream of. A knock at her door interrupted her reflections. Emma entered without waiting for permission, already dressed in her best frock, her blonde hair neatly braided. "Are you nervous?" the child asked, coming to stand beside Beatrice at the window. Beatrice smiled down at her. "A little," she admitted. "It's a big day." Emma considered this. "Uncle Jake is nervous too. His hands are shaking. He dropped his coffee cup twice." The image made Beatrice laugh. "That makes me feel better, actually." "He loves you a lot," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He told Michael and me that you're the best thing that ever happened to us." Emotion tightened Beatrice's throat. "You and Michael are the best things that ever happened to me," she replied. "And your uncle, of course." Emma looked pleased. "Does that mean we can call you Mama after today?" "Michael wants to, but he was afraid to ask." Beatrice knelt, taking Emma's small hands in hers. "I would be honored if you both called me Mama," she said earnestly. "But only if you're comfortable. I know your mother will always have a special place in your hearts." Emma's face turned thoughtful. "I don't remember her very well anymore," she confessed. "Just little things like how she smelled like flowers and sang songs at bedtime." "Then we'll keep those memories alive," Beatrice promised. "And we'll make new ones together." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You better get ready," she advised seriously. "Mrs. Miller said if the bride is late, It's bad luck." As Emma departed, Mrs. Miller arrived with Beatrice's wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk and lace that the doctor's wife had insisted on ordering from Sacramento. "It's almost time, dear," Mrs. Miller announced, her round face beaming with excitement. "Let's make you a bride." An hour later, Beatrice stood at the entrance to the barn, her arm linked with Dr. Miller's, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her own father. Through the open doors, she could see the gathered guests, townspeople, neighboring ranchers and their families, and the ranch hands in uncomfortable Sunday best. At the front, beside the preacher, stood Jacob, tall and handsome in a new suit, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief as he caught sight of her. Michael and Emma waited beside him, the boy fidgeting with the small cushion bearing the rings, the girl clutching her basket of wildflowers with solemn importance. As the violin began to play, Beatrice took her first step toward her future, her heart full to bursting. Each face she passed held smiles and good wishes, even Mrs. Caldwell, who had surprisingly accepted the invitation, though her son was notably absent. When she reached Jacob, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "You're a vision," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she replied, squeezing his hands. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional vows and heartfelt promises. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob's kiss was tender yet possessive, acclaiming in front of all who had gathered. The cheers and applause that followed seemed to seal their union in the approval of the community that had become her home. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. Beatrice danced first with her new husband, then with Michael standing on her toes, then with various neighbors and friends. Through it all, she caught glimpses of Jacob watching her, his eyes filled with a happiness that matched her own. As the night deepened and guests began to depart, Jacob found her at the edge of the dancing area, observing the remaining revelers. "Mrs. Norwood," he said, testing the name like a fine wine. "Are you ready to retire?" The implication in his tone sent heat to her cheeks. The children had been whisked away to Mrs. Larson's for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy that both anticipated and slightly feared in its newness. "Yes," she said simply, taking his offered hand. They thanked their remaining guests and slipped away to the house, which seemed both familiar and strange in the context of their new relationship. At the threshold, Jacob surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile, carrying her inside and kicking the door closed behind them. In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, his larger room rather than her small former quarters, nervousness overtook them both. For all his confidence, Jacob was as inexperienced in marriage as she was. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her, sensing her tension. "Nothing needs to happen that you're not ready for." His consideration touched her deeply. "I'm not afraid," she told him honestly. "Just new to this." Jacob's smile was tender. "As am I." He took her hands in his. "But I know that I love you, and that's the foundation for everything else." Their coming together that night was a sweet discovery, awkward at times, breathtaking at others, but ultimately a profound connection that transcended physical joining. In the aftermath, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness that confirmed every decision that had led her to this place. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments," she replied thoughtfully. "If Edwin Caldwell had wanted me, I would never have found you, or Emma and Michael, or this life that feels so perfectly mine." Jacob tightened his arms around her. "Remind me to thank him someday," he murmured against her hair. "Preferably from a distance, as I might still be tempted to break his jaw." Beatrice laughed softly. "No need. Living well is the best revenge, isn't it? And I intend to live very well indeed as your wife." The years that followed proved the truth of her words. Norwood Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Beatrice bringing organizational skills and fresh ideas that complemented Jacob's practical experience. The house became a true home, filled with laughter, learning, and love. Emma and Michael thrived with Beatrice as their mother, their education continuing at home until Emma was old enough for the finishing school in Sacramento that she had set her heart on. Michael showed his uncle's affinity for ranching, eagerly learning every aspect of the business while maintaining the scholarly habits his mother had instilled. 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to a son they named James, after Jacob's brother. The following year brought a daughter, Elizabeth. The family was complete, a blend of past and present that honored what had been while embracing what had become. Edwin Caldwell eventually left Placerville for San Francisco, his mercantile sold to a young couple from Oregon. Mrs. Caldwell remained, gradually becoming, if not a friend to Beatrice, then at least a cordial acquaintance who acknowledged the happiness her former prospective daughter-in-law had found. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Beatrice with a trip to Boston, a chance to revisit her past with the security of her present firmly established. They visited her parents' graves, called on former colleagues, and Beatrice showed her family the places that had shaped her early life. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked as they sat in the public garden, watching their children feed the ducks. "About leaving all this behind?" Beatrice considered the question seriously. "Not regrets exactly," she said finally. "More like appreciation for the path that led me to you. Boston made me who I was, but Placerville and you made me who I am." Jacob smiled, taking her hand as he had countless times over the years, the gesture no less meaningful for its familiarity. "The mail-order bride who found love on the second look," he mused. "It has a certain poetry to it." Beatrice laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "A very long poem," she agreed. "And we're still writing it, one day at a time." As the sun began to set over Boston Common, casting golden light over the city of her birth, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her west. The rejection that had once seemed like the end of her hopes had instead been the beginning of everything worth having. In the wild lands of California, she had found not just a husband but a family, a community, a purpose, and a love that had transformed disappointment into destiny. Jacob's arm around her shoulders drew her back to the present moment. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Beatrice looked at her children, their faces alight with discovery in this new place, and at her husband, whose love had never wavered since that day on the porch when he'd finally spoken his heart. "I'm already home," she said simply. "Wherever you and the children are, that's home to me." His kiss, tender despite the public setting, sealed the truth of her words. From mail-order bride to beloved wife and mother, from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to belonging, Beatrice Hayes Norwood had found her place in the world. All because a man had taken a second look and recognized the treasure others had overlooked. As they gathered their children and walked back to their hotel, Beatrice offered a silent thanks to whatever fate, chance, or providence had led her to that dusty train platform in Placerville. The journey hadn't been what she'd expected when she left Boston with a valise full of dreams and a heart full of hope. It had been infinitely better. In the years that followed, the story of the mail-order bride and the rancher became something of a legend in Placerville, told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but at its core remaining a tale of second chances and love that saw beyond first impressions. Jacob and Beatrice, growing old together surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, would sometimes hear versions of their own story from newcomers to the area, often smiling at the embellishments while acknowledging the essential truth. Sometimes love isn't found at first sight, but rather in the second glance that sees forever in what others overlook. And for the Norwood family, that forever proved to be the greatest blessing of all, a legacy of love that began with rejection, blossomed with acceptance, and endured through all of life's seasons with the strength of roots planted deep in California soil and hearts bound together by choice rather than chance.